Usually, I don't really like talking about frightening things, things related to disasters and terrifying events. But since this is something that must be dealt with in connection with the opening of the 6 seals, I had no choice but to show this to you. Now today let us take a look at the specific seals described in chapter 6. First, the first seal in verses 1 and 2. I said that this refers to deception. Last time we looked at Matthew 24 as we examined the overall picture of the seals being opened, and now we will move on to the second seal. The second seal is about war. It says, "To him was given a large sword." So as I mentioned, breaking the second seal is about war. The rider on the red horse was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. And it says he was given a large sword. So this is talking about war. After experiencing World War I and World War II, it became impossible to deny the reality of the end times. That's why it was from this point on, World War I and II, that people began to seriously study the end times. World War I was a war that lasted about 4 years and 4 months, from 1914 to 1918. It was a war that spanned Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and China. In other words, the continents of Europe, Africa, and Asia, as well as the Pacific Ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Caribbean Sea. During this time, 8.2 million people lost their lives. Throughout the 6,000 years of human history, there have been many wars, but there was never a war in which more than 1 million people died. However, with the outbreak of World War I in the 20th century, a massive war occurred in which 8.2 million people lost their lives. After that, there was World War II. World War II was a war that lasted for 6 years, from 1939 to 1945. And we are connected to this Second World War, right? World War II came to an end when Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. The Second World War was a war that spread across Europe, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and the Americas. It involved most of the major continents, Europe, Asia, the Americas, and Africa, and extended across the Mediterranean Sea, the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Indian Ocean. That is what the Second World War was. So in the 6,000 years of human history, there had never been a war where more than 1 million people were killed. But in this case, between 50 and 70 million people died. This is what is referred to as a large sword. Here, when we look at the second seal, it says a large sword was given. A massive war, the greatest war in human history, broke out at this time. So during that same period in our country, Korea, about 4.5 million people died as a result of the Korean War. In other words, throughout the previous 6,000 years, there had not been a single war in which more than 1 million people died, but in the Korean War alone, approximately 4.5 million people lost their lives. And it was right at the end of World War II that nuclear weapons were born. It was because of nuclear weapons that the war came to an end. So nuclear weapons emerged at that point, and the nation of Israel was also established as a result of World War II. Thus, the nation of Israel officially became a fully independent nation on May 14, 1948. Consequently, it is widely recognized that both World Wars I and II represent truly major, transformative turning points in the broader scope of human history and world history as we know it today. And also Matthew chapter 24 states that nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and this is related to the second seal, war. You remember that, right? Ever since the end of the World War II, from that point until now, countless ethnic conflicts have continually broken out all over the world, so many that they cannot even be numbered. This still remains a reality even to this day. For example, the Kurds in the Middle East. In connection with the Syrian civil war, the Kurds have continued to be involved. In fact, in the fight against Islamic State, the very ISIS that spread such terror, it was the Kurdish forces that played a significant role in defeating them and helping to resolve that crisis. But the Kurds are an ethnic people scattered across Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran, and they desire independence. They want to form a nation of their own too. There are more than 30 million Kurds today. So they keep trying to gain independence, but things aren't going the way they want. There are kinds of ethnic issues like this, ethnic problems that we may not know much about, but they really exist all over the world in so many places. Another example we know well is the conflict between the Jews and the Palestinians. The Palestinian issue in the land of Israel, which is considered the powder keg of the Middle East, remains one of the most representative and persistent conflicts in the world. So, the Palestinian people have the Palestine Liberation Organization, but they still don't have their own country. They're asking to be recognized as a nation. That's why they established the Palestine Liberation Organization. And through diplomatic efforts, including appeals to the United Nations, and through support among Muslim communities, they've continued their struggle to establish a nation of their own. That's why they keep clashing with Israel. So, although there were already a wide variety of these types of deep-seated ethnic conflicts before, they have become remarkably more intense, frequent, and incredibly diverse following the end of World War II. About 15 or 16 years ago, when I visited Cambodia and Vietnam, there was the so-called killing fields, the infamous massacre that took place in Cambodia in the 1970s. In that massacre, approximately 2 million people, which accounted for nearly 1/3 of Cambodia's entire population, were tragically massacred there. This devastating event stands as one of the many profound human tragedies that occurred across the globe in the years following the end of World War II. So at that time, we went to see the killing fields, but they were closed that day, so we couldn't go in. Instead, nearby, there's a place called Tuol Sleng, which is set up like a memorial similar to Seodaemun Prison in Korea. It's a place where they closed down a high school, turned it into something like a concentration camp, and used it as a place for torture and massacres. I remember seeing a memorial hall about that. That is also a tragedy that resulted from ethnic conflict. And in Thailand, due to ethnic and religious conflicts from the 1990s to the 2000s, over a span of 15 years, 7,000 people died just in one village in that one area. Also, Rwandan genocide in 1994 is well known as well. In just 3 months, 800,000 people were killed. And 2 million people fled to neighboring countries. These kinds of tragedies are all ethnic conflicts that arose as a result of the world wars. And as I mentioned earlier, although the world wars ended in our country, the Korean War broke out almost immediately afterward, not long after. And as a result of the Korean War, 4.5 million people died. Events like these happen not only in our country, but all around the world. And even now, many of these issues remain unresolved in various places and continue to persist. For example, there are still frequent riots by black people in the United States. In other words, racial discrimination is still happening. And these are ethnic conflicts. And even now, hatred toward Jews continues to be a persistent problem in places like Europe and the United States. It's becoming more serious. So when we watch world news, we often see incidents where someone enters a Jewish synagogue and opens fire, shouting that Jews must die and committing such massacres. There are many such incidents of killings and violence. So as these kinds of incidents continue to occur with increasing severity in various regions of Europe and the United States. Last year in Germany, for example, Jews were even told not to wear what is called a kippah on their heads. There were even legal discussions about prohibiting the wearing of the kippah. That shows just how serious the issues of hatred toward Jews and ethnic conflict have become. So these issues are happening all over the world, in places like the Tamils in Sri Lanka, the Moros in the Philippines, the Basques in Spain, China, the Tibetans, the Kosovo crisis, the Bosnian War, India, Myanmar, China, and Mongolia. While I was talking with the missionary in Nagaland in northeast India, where our missionary church of Bride Church is located, I realized that Nagaland actually shares a border with Myanmar. So I heard that there are ongoing territorial disputes and tensions between Myanmar and the Nagaland area of India, and that their relationship remains strained. So, there are an overwhelming number of various ethnic conflicts unfolding in every corner of the globe today. This means that what Matthew 24 describes, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, has been happening for many decades now and is steadily escalating into much more severe and critical situations as time goes on. The world is now constantly causing conflicts due to territorial issues, religious issues, racial issues, and resource issues, and wars and disputes are constantly occurring. What do you think about this, everyone? The nation rising against nation and kingdom against kingdom that Jesus spoke of in Matthew 24. The wars that arise in opposition, and the one who received the great sword that destroys peace when the second seal is opened, and the war that the second seal speaks of. Do you agree that those are related to the First and Second World Wars and the ethnic conflicts that have persisted for decades since then? Yes, I've had enough time to search and research these materials and come to a conclusion. Well, rather than saying a conclusion, this is how I understand and accept. Last time we saw this verse in Matthew 24. All these are the beginning of birth pains. I believe the First and Second World Wars were significant events and the beginning of those intense birth pains and agonizing labor pains.